Islamic Golden Age trade expansion. 8th to 14th century, strengthening Middle Eastern commerce. Introduction. The rise of a flourishing trade network. The Islamic Golden Age, spanning from the 8th to the 14th century, was a period of remarkable intellectual, cultural, and economic growth in the Islamic world. One of the most significant aspects of this era was the expansion and transformation of trade networks, particularly in the Middle East. As the Abbasid Caliphate rose to power, the region became a central hub for international commerce, linking the East to the West and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. This era of economic prosperity not only transformed the Middle East, but also left a lasting impact on the broader world. 1. The foundations of trade in the Islamic world. The expansion of the Islamic Empire. Following the rapid expansion of the Islamic Empire after the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE, the Middle East became a melting pot of cultures, religions, and languages. The Caliphates, first under the Umayyads, 661 to 750 CE, and later the Abbasids, 750 to 1258 CE, established vast territories that stretched from Spain in the west to India in the east, and from North Africa to Central Asia. The Islamic Caliphates controlled key trade routes that connected Europe, Asia, and Africa. The expansion of the empire laid the groundwork for an interconnected world, where goods, people, and ideas could travel across vast distances. The role of Islam in trade expansion. Islamic teachings emphasize the importance of trade and commerce. The Quran and the Hadiths, sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, encouraged ethical business practices such as honesty, fairness, and the avoidance of exploitation. This fostered a conducive environment for trade and helped establish the Islamic world as a place where merchants could operate with trust and security. Moreover, Islamic traders enjoyed strong religious unity, which helped foster a sense of cooperation across vast distances, uniting regions under a common faith. This religious connection helped overcome linguistic, cultural, and regional barriers, creating a more unified market for trade. 2. The key trade routes of the Islamic Golden Age. The Silk Road and Trans-Eurasian trade. One of the most important trade routes during the Islamic Golden Age was the Silk Road, which linked China, Central Asia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its capital in Baghdad, became the central node of the Silk Road, facilitating the exchange of goods such as silk, spices, precious metals, and paper. China exported silk, porcelain, and tea to the Middle East. Central Asia provided horses, fur, and livestock. The Middle East became a central marketplace for goods from the East and the West. Islamic merchants, often traveling along the Silk Road, were instrumental in linking East Asia to the Mediterranean world, ensuring the continued flow of trade goods. Maritime routes, connecting the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean was another key region for trade, especially between the Arab world and India, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Islamic merchants were active in ports such as Basra, Damascus, and Cairo, creating a vast maritime trade network. Key goods traded via the Indian Ocean included spices from India and Southeast Asia, gold and ivory from East Africa, textiles and pottery from the Indian subcontinent. The dhow ships used by Arab traders were the backbone of the Indian Ocean trade. These ships were equipped with sails that allowed them to traverse vast distances across the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, and the Persian Gulf. The Trans-Saharan trade routes. The Trans-Saharan trade routes connected North Africa to West Africa and were crucial for the flow of gold, salt, and slaves. These routes were vital for the economies of both the Islamic Caliphates and the African kingdoms of the Sahel region, such as the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires. Gold from West Africa flowed northward, while salt, essential for preservation and nutrition, came south from the deserts. Islamic traders played a central role in facilitating trade across the Sahara Desert, establishing trading posts in cities like Timbuktu, which became major centers of learning, commerce, and culture. The trans-Saharan routes were especially important in the 8th to 14th centuries, as they helped integrate the economies of Africa and the Islamic world. 3. Key goods traded during the Islamic Golden Age. Spices and luxury goods. One of the most valuable commodities traded during the Islamic Golden Age was spices, particularly from India and Southeast Asia. Spices such as pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom were highly prized and in great demand in Europe, the Middle East, and China. These spices not only enhanced the flavor of food, but were also used in medicine, perfume, and religious rituals. In addition to spices, other luxury goods, such as silk, precious metals, and jewels, were traded widely. The Middle East served as a hub for the redistribution of these goods, making them available across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Textiles and fine goods. Textiles were another important part of the trade during the Islamic Golden Age. The production of fine cloth, particularly silk and cotton, flourished under the Islamic empires. Cities such as Damascus, Baghdad, and Cairo became renowned for their textiles, which were traded throughout the empire and beyond. Persian carpets were highly prized in Europe and the Mediterranean. Cotton and silk fabrics were highly sought after by elites in both the Islamic world and China. Knowledge, paper, and science. One of the most enduring legacies of the Islamic Golden Age was the spread of knowledge, particularly in science, mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. The development of paper, originally brought to the Islamic world by Chinese traders, revolutionized the spread of literacy and knowledge. The city of Baghdad became a major center of learning, housing the House of Wisdom, where scholars translated and expanded upon the knowledge of ancient Greece, Persia, and India. The trade of knowledge, including medical texts, mathematical concepts, and astronomical findings, was one of the most significant aspects of this era. The Islamic world was instrumental in preserving and transmitting ancient knowledge to Europe, which later influenced the Renaissance. 4. The impact of trade on the Islamic world. Economic prosperity. The trade expansion during the Islamic Golden Age brought immense economic prosperity to the Middle East. Cities like Baghdad, Cairo, Damascus, and Cordoba became thriving commercial centers, attracting merchants from across the world. Wealth generated from trade helped fund the construction of monumental buildings, the patronage of scholars and artists, and the development of Islamic culture. Baghdad was particularly famous for its bazaars and bustling marketplaces, where merchants traded a wide range of goods. Cairo, a major trade hub in North Africa, became a center for Islamic art, architecture, and science. Cultural exchange and innovation. Trade during the Islamic Golden Age led to the exchange of ideas, technologies, and cultural practices. The Islamic world was at the forefront of scientific advancements in areas like mathematics, chemistry, and medicine. Cultural exchange between the Islamic world and Europe, leading to the translation of ancient Greek and Roman texts into Arabic and later into Latin. The introduction of paper revolutionized learning and communication across the Islamic world and beyond. The lasting legacy of the Islamic Golden Age. The Islamic Golden Age from the 8th to the 14th century was a period of profound trade expansion that significantly strengthened the economic and cultural foundations of the Middle East. The establishment of extensive trade networks, the exchange of goods, ideas, and innovations, and the rise of prosperous cities solidified the Islamic world's role as a central player in the global economy. This era not only shaped the Middle East, but also laid the groundwork for future global trade, cultural exchange, and scientific progress. The legacy of this flourishing trade continues to resonate in modern times, reminding us of the lasting impact of the Islamic Golden Age on the world. Manorialism and Feudal Economy, 9th to 15th century, defining medieval European economies. Introduction. Foundations of medieval European society. During the 9th to 15th centuries, medieval Europe was marked by a distinctive economic and social system known as manorialism, deeply intertwined with the broader feudal system. These systems were the backbone of medieval European economies, and they influenced nearly every aspect of life, from the organization of land and labor to social hierarchies and power structures. At the heart of these systems was the concept of land ownership, the relationship between lords and vassals, and the reliance on agricultural production to sustain the economy. 1. The origins of feudalism and manorialism. Collapse of the Roman Empire and the rise of feudalism. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE left Europe fragmented, with a lack of centralized authority. This collapse led to the decentralization of power and the emergence of a new system, feudalism. Power was no longer concentrated in a single ruling body, but instead spread across a network of local lords who controlled land and could offer protection in exchange for loyalty and service. The term feudalism describes the hierarchical system that emerged in the early Middle Ages, where land was granted by a lord, usually a king or noble, to a vassal in exchange for military service and loyalty. This relationship was reciprocal. Lords provided protection, and vassals, often knights or lower nobility, pledged loyalty and service in return for land, also known as fiefs. The rise of manorialism. At the heart of feudalism was manorialism, the system of economic and social organization centered around the manor, the estate or large agricultural estate owned by a lord. Manorialism was the economic counterpart to feudalism, and it structured rural life and agriculture in the medieval period. A manor typically included the lord's residence or castle, farmland where peasants worked, a village with houses for serfs or peasants who worked the land, common land for grazing animals, collecting firewood, and other shared resources. Under this system, the manor was largely self-sufficient, with everything needed for survival being produced within its boundaries. 2. Structure of manorialism. The lord and the serfs. The lord of the manor. The lord was typically a nobleman who owned the manor and the surrounding lands. The lord had complete authority over the manor, its inhabitants, and its agricultural output. He was responsible for the protection of the people on the manor and often had a role in local governance. The lord granted land, a fief, to his vassals or knights, who would, in turn, provide military service when needed. The lord also had the power to administer justice on the manor, handling disputes among the peasants or overseeing minor legal matters. While the lord enjoyed the benefits of his land, he also had responsibilities. He had to protect his peasants and vassals from external threats, maintain order, and ensure that agricultural production was steady to support the entire manor. The peasants and serfs. The majority of people living on the manor were peasants and serfs. While peasants worked the land, serfs were bound to it, meaning they couldn't leave the manor without the lord's permission. Serfs were not slaves, but their freedom was heavily restricted. They were required to work the lord's land for a certain number of days each week, a practice known as corvée labor. Peasants, on the other hand, had more freedom but still worked the land in exchange for shelter, food, and protection from the lord. In exchange for the right to live and work on the lord's land, serfs and peasants had to pay various forms of rent. These could include a portion of the crops they grew, payments in kind, like animals or goods, or labor. The manorial system was designed to keep the local economy self-sufficient, with limited reliance on external trade. 3. Agricultural practices and the economy of the manor. Agricultural production, the backbone of the medieval economy. The manorial system was largely agrarian, and agricultural productivity was at the heart of its economy. The manor's economy was based on 3 key components. Crop farming. The majority of the manor's land was cultivated by the peasants, growing grains such as wheat, barley, and oats. Livestock. Cattle, sheep, and pigs were raised for food, wool, and leather. Forests. Many manors had forests where peasants could gather wood for fuel, hunt game, or forage for wild plants. The 3-field system, a method of crop rotation, was one of the major innovations during the Middle Ages. It allowed for more efficient land use, ensuring that 1/3 of the land was always left fallow to regain fertility, while the other 2/3 were rotated for planting. The manor as a self-sustaining unit. Manors were designed to be self-sufficient, meaning they were largely isolated from the broader economy. Each manor produced most of what it needed to survive, from food to clothing to tools. Mills, often operated by the lord or a designated worker, were used for grinding grain into flour, and peasants were required to pay a mill fee. Blacksmiths and tanners were often found on manors, creating tools and clothing for the community. Bakeries and breweries were sometimes present, providing basic foodstuffs for the peasants and the lord. This system reduced the need for long-distance trade, though it also limited economic growth outside of the manor. 4. Economic transactions, rent, labor, and tribute. Rent and fees, the financial structure of the manor. The primary economic transaction in the manorial system was the exchange of land and labor. Serfs and peasants paid rent to the lord in the form of labor, working the lord's land for a certain number of days per week. Goods, a portion of the crops grown or other produce like wool or meat. Money. In some cases, peasants paid rent in coin, though this was less common than payments in kind. Tribute and tithes. In addition to the rent paid to the lord, peasants were also required to pay tithes to the church, usually 1/10 of their produce. This was an important source of income for the clergy and helped maintain religious institutions. As manorialism was deeply embedded in the feudal system, the economy was also based on the exchange of loyalty and protection. The vassals pledged their loyalty and military service to their lords in exchange for fiefs or land. This relationship between lords and vassals created a web of interdependence that helped maintain stability in medieval European society. 5. Decline of manorialism and transition to early modern economies. The Black Death and economic shifts. The Black Death, which struck Europe in the mid-14th century, dramatically reduced the population and caused widespread labor shortages. With fewer workers available, peasants and serfs gained greater bargaining power and began to demand higher wages and better working conditions. This shift undermined the rigid manorial system and led to the gradual decline of serfdom. Growth of trade in towns. By the late medieval period, towns and markets began to grow, and trade became increasingly important. This marked a shift away from the self-sufficient manor system toward a more interconnected economy. As towns grew, a new class of merchants and artisans emerged, contributing to the growth of a more complex economic system. The increasing importance of monetary exchange over payments in kind further weakened the traditional manorial economy and laid the foundation for the commercial revolution that would define the Renaissance and the early modern era. The legacy of manorialism and feudal economy. The manorial system and the feudal economy defined medieval European life for nearly 1,000 years. They were based on the rigid hierarchies of land, labor, and loyalty, with a majority of people living on the land working in service to their lords. This system structured not just the economy, but also the social and political life of the Middle Ages. While the system began to break down in the later medieval period due to factors such as plague, increased trade, and urbanization, its legacy remains a crucial part of understanding medieval society. The transition from the manorial economy to a more market-based and trade-oriented system helped pave the way for the Renaissance and the eventual emergence of modern economies.